As a maker, I enjoy playing with this stuff, play being very serious. I like suddenly being in conversation with kind of Milton and Paradise Lost. I'm not interested in doing angels who are kind of hunky bikers with feathers. I think the weirdness of angels is essential to how you'd use them in a story. But I sort of am and am not taking it literally. I'm creating a fantastic piece of structure for a story which is adjacent to the stuff I really feel and really believe, but is not a straightforward one-to-one mapping of it into the story. I do not, in fact, believe that the air over London in 1940 was full of angels as it was of bombers.
Welcome to Shop Talk with Writers, the podcast where we are curious about the stories behind the books. I'm Elena Lappin, and my very interesting guest today is award-winning and much-loved novelist and nonfiction writer Francis Bufford. His new novel is called Nonesuch. It features London during the Blitz, but not as you might imagine it. Its heroine Iris is not only feisty and sexy, but also able to take on forces that are not quite of this world. Here's Francis Spufford reading from his novel Nonesuch. Enjoy.
I'm Francis Spufford, non-fiction writer, transmogrified into a novelist. And this is a reading from my next novel, Nonesuch, set in 1939 to 40 during the darkness of the Blitz. Darkness. The biggest difference was the darkness. Bombers or no bombers, from the very first day of the war, the blackout regulations had been enforced. And London, after dark, was now a dim maze, with the occasional searchlights in the sky the only bright thing, and the ground all the blacker then by contrast. Buildings were coal black cliffs, pavements were vistas of black on black, grey on black, black on grey, which you squinted along, unsure whether the obscure stir of movement you saw was a trick of the eye or another pedestrian about to collide with you head on. You didn't realise how much artificial light there usually was until it was all taken away. The headlights of cars and taxis had been papered over, leaving a slit through which a mere thread of light came wavering over the tarmac. The papers were full of stories of accidents, of walkers mashed against pillar boxes by drivers unable to see the edge of the roadway. Inside buses, the lamps had all been covered by perforated cowls, so you travelled in a speckled gloom, peering out through a diamond-shaped hole in the middle of the window covering, trying to guess whether you'd reached your stop or not. It wasn't too bad to begin with, getting to and from work. The late summer light lingered in the September evenings, and Iris could be back in Clapham before the city wrapped on its shroud. But as the autumn days shortened, the blackout enfolded the evening journey home ever more tightly. Despite the announcement that this year British summertime would run for an extra month, by the second half of October she was coming out of C&B into dusk, with shadow filling up the deep streets of the city like a rising liquid, and then into unambiguous night. The Mariner building stood on a sloping side street. Left and down took you to Upper Thames Street and then to the river, where in the crack between warehouses the shimmer of moon and water could be seen. But all the streets there led under, not to, London Bridge. She turned right and up. Deep and deeper shade. A rumble and a brief shift in the shadows at the junction up ahead suggested a bus going by, but hers were the only feet on Mariner Lane. There was a walk which she, along with every other Londoner, had perfected for nights when you couldn't see your legs and didn't know what sudden holes or ridges or obstacles the pavement might be hiding. Higher stepping than usual, with a tentative probing motion as you put each foot down. It made for slow progress. The hesitant click and then click of her court shoes reached the round postbox at the end of the Mariner building, into which so many of the outbound S1 forms had been stuffed on their way to the lawyers and widows of the suburbs. There was an alley there, no more than a dead-ended slot, where the building's rubbish bins stood in a row. It was lightless as ink now, as an ocean abyss into which sunlight had never penetrated and never would. And anyone in that darkness looking towards her, passing its mouth, could only have detected her as the faintest of moving outlines. An ambiguous swirling of dark on dark. Yet she was suddenly seized by the conviction that she was being seen, that an attention as powerful as any searchlight, though invisible to her, was pushing through the darkness, was ignoring the darkness as no obstruction at all, and gripping her in a remorseless focus, crystal clear and implacable. It had happened before. It was the same as the feeling in the dormer window at Wildwood Terrace 2 months ago. Her body recognised it immediately. A flutter of panic ran through her. She could hear her own breath coming stammeringly in little gasps against her teeth, but her mind was reluctant. It clung stubbornly to the version of the world in which a bad night's adventure had only led to a bad dream. "Hello?" she said, making herself stand still. "Hello? Is there anyone there?" She peered into the abyss of ink. Nothing. Not a hint of movement, except, after a minute of staring, the swimming purple blots and flares created by her own eyes to fill vacancy. No sound at all. Nothing. There was a smell, maybe. Probably the sour rot of the rubbish, only perhaps more mildewed. "I will just check," said her defiant reason. It made her fumble in her bag for a box of safety matches and, finding it, fumble one out, and with box in one hand and match in the other, strike it shakily and hold the flame up in front of her. And yelp and drop it, because what she saw in the flaring light for the instants before the match became a downward bright streak was a shape only 4 or 5 feet away from her, the shape of a man in a hat and an overcoat, only more massive than that, bulkier, and with its head lying flat on its shoulder as no head should, and with a face that from this distance she could see was made of newspaper. Not covered in newspaper, not masked in newspaper, made of newsprint, old yellowed paper with smeary blocks of black type on it, in an arrangement nobody could mistake for eyes and mouth, only moving and creasing and silently swelling and puckering, the skin of something alive within. There was an impression of age about the whole thing. It was old newspaper. It was a battered black hat. It was a thin and ragged old black coat, worn, dirty stuff, clothes that had been out in the rain and the wind for a long, long time, rotting in place on a body that wasn't a body. The moment the light was gone, the moment the sight of the thing was withdrawn, she wanted to disbelieve in it again, urgently, passionately, but something, some lingering phosphorescence from the burned-out match, some stray photon from the rising moon, bounced to her off looming black walls, alerted her to fast movement. Her retinas informed her instincts. Her instincts ignored her mind and shouted at her body instead. She ducked aside. The newspaper fist that had been coming her way, accelerating on the end of a roughly arm-shaped tube of fluid, hit the pillar box instead. Whatever lived inside the newspaper skin, liquid though it might be, was stronger and heavier than any limb of bone and muscle. It hit the cast-iron wall of the postbox with a resonant clang and a rending of metal. "Run, pray," said her instincts. She ran.
Francis Bufford, thank you very much for this excellent reading from your new novel, Nonesuch, published by Faber, and welcome to Shop Talk with Writers.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, yeah, pour yourself coffee.
Thank you. It's just the gurgling sound you can hear now.
We are recording this in the basement of the Faber building called the Bindery in Hatton Garden. And let me just begin by saying how much London as a character is in this novel. I found that I recognized almost every street you mentioned, except for the fictional ones, of course, completely invented ones. There are such buildings or perhaps, street corners. But on the whole, the tube, the buses, the streets, most of the buildings, the corners, the atmosphere. And this is London 1939. Did you want London to be a fully fledged character in this particular novel?
I did, for several reasons. The first of which, and the most kind of general of which, is that I love cities, and I seem, now I'm a novelist, to write mainly about cities. I like the kind of intimate combination of very different lives in them. I like the challenge of making the place live and seem populated and seem to do that thing which the world of a book ought to do, of existing beyond the bounds of the story, so that if the character turned left instead of right, they would go on being more city instead of the suddenly being just empty paper. And London is the big city I know best. When I've lived here twice for 2 installments. I love the strange social layering that goes into the square mile and the city of London, specifically with the kind of medieval street plan turning into glass towers of finance these days, and the sense of a history many folds or plies deep being squashed down together into the pavements. But also, this is a Blitz novel, though it's a fantasy as much as it is a straight historical novel, and the Blitz is London's epic moment. It's the point at which all of the things that the city are get put under this enemy pressure, and it's also an immensely visited moment in terms of later writing, and I was quite frightened of going back somewhere where there were so many tropes waiting for you to repeat them. And it struck me that one of the things I could do and wanted to do with London was to keep making the past that bit more familiar by showing that the London of then was in many ways already the London of now, so that there wasn't that kind of comfortable period distance for readers. So I wanted the modernity of 1939 to 1940 London to be the thing that came through. Which meant I had to be a bit selective. There's a bit where Iris, my protagonist, finds herself going dancing in a basement full of coloured lights moving in rhythm, and that's because she has specifically gone to a film club where a Len Live film strip is showing, which was not the average experience of going dancing in 1939 in London, but it's the thing that allows the contact of familiarity for the reader. So I wanted as much of this London as possible to kind of resonate with present day London. Whether I could then fit in the imaginary streets so that they seemed as natural and as real as the real streets is kind of one of the tests of the writing. I was hoping to kind of to sneak them in. In some ways, the thing that would please me most is if somebody mistook a real street for one I'd made up. But I don't expect I'll hear about that if it happens.
I found myself mapping the London in your book to or with the London that I sometimes encounter. So, for example, you walk down Soho streets and everything is Soho today, and then suddenly you come across this little garden or park, and it says this was built on top of a bomb crater after a Blitz bombing, and they covered it with new growth, new life. But what was there originally was something entirely different, was, life, then death, destruction, and then life again. And I was wondering, this is officially your novel number 3, although not quite officially. It's possibly your novel number 4.
It may be officially my novel number 4.
I'm counting Red Plenty as a novel.
Golden Hill, Light Perpetual, Cahokia Jazz 3, Nonesuch 4.
Oh,
and
then
that's
maybe
without
5.
even including the ambiguous Red Plenty.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that, because Red Plenty is nonfiction kind of merging with fiction, developing into fiction. Very, very interesting writing phenomenon, experiment. I don't know. I'd love to talk about that. But your first kind of official novel was Golden Hill, which was set in New York, 1746. And you said in an amazing interview, which I would direct all our listeners to look up online, in 2017, to the Commonweal magazine in America. You were asked about your research for that. And you said you walked around certain parts of Manhattan, but not looking up, looking down, imagining what was there then. Did you do anything similar in London today?
I did exactly the same thing again, because if it worked once, I'm not going to discard it as a method. So for 1746 New York, I had photocopied sort of contemporary street maps on me, and I walked around ignoring the skyscrapers, noticing that the streets were called things like Hanover Square in New York. So this time I got a contemporary A to Z, took out the pages for the city, and walked it as much as I could. And you have more visual clues to go on in London than you do in New York. New York, unhelpfully, 18th century New York burned down almost completely twice, so that I found a single oxblood coloured wall in Chinatown in New York that would give me kind of a sense of physical contact with the past, and that was it. Whereas London is layered, and there's still quite a lot of 1939 London on view. It was rebuilt with lots and lots of kind of Beaux-Arts, kind of that sort of chateaus of commerce thing, about 5 or 6 stories high, was very big in the early 20th century, and there's lots of that still standing. And there are older things too. There are bits of medieval gateways, and there's that sense. There's that sense you get in an old city of these unpredictable wells of past time that open here and there, and I wanted to convey the weirdness of London and its history as well, if I could, which is why there is this kind of alchemical layer of early modern London, mostly gone, but still influencing what's happening in the 20th century London of Nonesuch, because cities never exist in one time at once, unless they're built completely from scratch, like Brasilia or something designed by Le Corbusier, and they've got kind of one historical layer to them. They are always these kind of ingrained, complicated, collaged, broken multiple surfaces within which you can feel umpteen different times.
And your characters are also reflections of that kind of London. They come from different parts of it, different layers of it, different historical parts of it, and different sort of awarenesses of where they are in the city. And so let's speak about your main protagonist, Iris, who is an amazing young woman. You describe her as being as adventurous as your grandmother.
Yes.
Also coming from Watford.
Yes. Although Iris is not my grandmother.
I know,
because
you
my
say
grandmother,
that too.
My grandmother said one kind of fascinating thing about the rackety life she was leading in the 1930s, and then clammed up completely. So Iris is an invention designed to kind of bring out and celebrate the kind of thing she might have been doing. Now Iris is a lower middle class girl from the suburbs with a family connection to working in finance, but who is basically a chancer, quite ruthless, genuinely self-centered, which I think female characters should be allowed to be, and desperate to find a way to rise and to make her presence felt in a kind of world of money, which is extraordinarily patriarchal at that point, and all of whose explicit rules kind of just completely eliminate any possibility of her ever doing anything anyone would have heard of. But she's very resourceful, and the war is coming as well, when suddenly a huge swathe of the men will be gone and women will suddenly be invited into roles which they were previously forbidden. So that's going to happen. But she is also somebody with a past in which something has gone wrong, although she doesn't talk about it and we don't find out about it for a very long time. Something which has cut her off from her suburban childhood and has set her up as this extremely self-reliant creature, following her own tastes and pleasures, some of which are exactly what you'd expect from a phrase like tastes and pleasures, with good-looking men she doesn't respect, because if she did respect them, her life would become too complicated and she has plans. Needless to say, the thing which could complicate the life of someone like that to the maximum would be to fall in love with somebody who was not their usual type at all. So that is, among other things, what's happening.
She's not looking for that, is she?
No,
she's
not
actually
even
mainly looking for sex.
Yes.
And she gets it.
And finding it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the picture you paint of Iris in her silver dress, I can't wait to see that on a screen of some form or shape.
There is a silver dress I have in mind, a specific one worn by Jean Harlow in a 1930s film. I doubt that Iris could actually have afforded anything quite that slinky, but it's definitely on the slinky spectrum.
She could have. She was resourceful.
Yeah.
She could have found a cheap version of that.
Yeah.
She meets a lot of posh people who she totally knows how to read. And
yes, they can't necessarily read her at the same time.
Exactly. They don't read her. But let's get to the sort of heart of the story, which is, well, we've established that we're in London just before and during the Blitz, 1939. Yeah. Just you open the novel with a few moments of the before the war is in the air, but not yet happening, but then it happens. And then you bring in a whole feast of supernatural black magic, which is linked with fascists.
Yes.
In a very interesting way. And I don't want to give anything away. I always find it really hard on this podcast to talk about things I really want to talk about, but am not allowed. But I will ask you, what is your source for that other than your imagination?
The historical link between fascism and kind of and dodgy occultism is real and historical. It's one of those unexpected things between the sort of the Aleister Crowley world and the kind of Orders of the Golden Dawn kind of world, and British fascism and other strange stuff like vegetarianism and an interest in polyphonic singing. Those social worlds are weirdly adjacent to each other. Polyphonic singing? Who knows?
What does that do for a fascist?
It provides fantasies of unlimited power, basically. Mm-hmm. It provides... It's another way of appealing, I think, fairly directly to the kind of the fascist mythos, which has to do with the world actually being a place of kind of magic, instinct, kind of blood and authenticating violence rather than reason, experiment, argument, and discussion. There's something absolute about magic if it existed and worked. There's something about the idea of being able to bully the universe with a spell, which goes very well if you're also wearing a black shirt and jumpers. So I had something to go on there, a kind of germ to work from. One of the ways in which I think it still shows up that I was once a nonfiction writer is that there tends to be a piece of kind of factual grit around which I then attempt to secrete the kind of fictional pearl. Let's not follow this and turn my imagination into an oyster, because that's yeah. No, the fascist connection is real, but so is the kind of metaphorical connection with the intense literal darkness of the Blitz. That bit I read at the beginning of the podcast, I hoped showed kind of one of the ways that I got into the whole story, which is that if you imagine a city which has had its lights removed, you've also imagined a city kind of wound back into some sort of pre-civilized state every time the sun goes down, where every street turns back into the wild forest where anything might happen. So in a way, there's something already kind of inherently a bit gothic about the Blitz, and there's also something about the palpable pressing presence of real historical evil there, which it kind of made sense to me to translate into supernatural evil. It felt like a kind of concentrating poetic comment on real historical evil, rather than an evasion of it into something fairy story like. I hope that you read Nonesuch with more of a sense of 1940 being, as the Trotskyist Victor Serge said, midnight in the century, not feeling that you've been let out of the kind of grimness and power of the moment into something which was merely fun. Though obviously I'd kind of like it to be fun too, if that's all right.
You know, I brought your book to this interview, another book of yours, your previous novel called Light Perpetual, and a book by George Orwell, Coming Up for Air, which was written and published originally in 1939 and is literally about the same period, 1939.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've read it or remember it.
Not for a very long time, but yes, I have read it, and I remember it as being very good on the atmosphere of the phony war, and also the kind of the everyday kind of petty bourgeois oppressions of respectable English life, and the way that they then merge seamlessly into the terrors of war.
And what has been said about that book is that it contained the kind of embryonic elements of his future fiction, 1984, and Animal Farm as well. And I was wondering, in your earlier novels, would you say that there is a fictional preparation, early elements of Nonesuch in your earlier novels? So I have a theory, and you can disprove it. I think the theme of finance is in Red Plenty, where you apply it to Soviet economics. And the theme of wartime London is obviously in Light Perpetual, where you write about 5 children who perished during the Blitz, and you imagine what their lives might have been. So does that make sense, or are there other themes as well?
Oh, absolutely. I quite often seem to introduce things as kind of subordinate themes that then come back bigger later on, and I think I'm finished with something and then discover that I'm absolutely not. So yes, I mean, Light Perpetual is London since the Second World War, really. It's a book about the transformation of London and about the unordinariness of ordinary lives. And it is it's a sort of kind of downbeat love song to the bits of South London I know very well as well, specifically. So for that, the war is just a starting point. It was the kind of cradle of those lives if they'd survived the explosion at the beginning. And the sense I had when I was talking earlier about streets being layered with time was something I'd felt very vividly in the New Cross Road, which I walked up and down every week going to teach at Goldsmiths College, where there was a very small and unobtrusive plaque on a branch of Iceland saying that a V2 fell there in November 1944 and killed an extraordinary number of people, including a lot of children. And I thought about the way that it is ordinary for a city to fold extraordinary destructive tragedies like that just into the kind of the ordinariness of street life, and all the good stuff too. I mean, the tender things and the triumphant things, as well as the tragedies just going down into the pavements. And I thought I was kind of done with rockets and explosions and bombs as a result, but apparently not, because one of the things that stayed with me was my curiosity about what the repetitiveness of being bombed was like. I'm lucky enough to have belonged to a kind of entirely peacetime generation. I was born in 1964. The war happened when my parents were children and was therefore by definition unthinkably far off in time. It seems less far off in time now. And because
Did you hear any of their stories?
Not much, because my mother was evacuated to the Welsh borders and she can remember the red glow of Liverpool burning on the horizon, but bombs did not fall on her. And my father was likewise in Somerset, and he could remember helping to get in the harvest. Harvest got in entirely by women and old men with scythes in 1939. But no, that didn't give me the way in, because my curiosity is about the way that, I mean, it's ordinary in our generation. You know, every now and again there's a bomb, an aeroplane crashes, whatever. But it's a unique and dreadful event, and people then spend months or years getting over it. Whereas with bombing during the Second World War, it happened every night. And in a way, the astonishing thing is not how people coped with the terror, but that after a night of it, they repeatedly got up, put on office clothes, and went to work. And the idea of the routines of the city and the working life of the city and the systems of the city still shakily but successfully functioning every day, and people accepting as a new normal that every night it would be pitch black and strangers would fly overhead trying to kill you, which is a phrase of Orwell's. That seems to me to be a kind of a challenge to the contemporary imagination, and one I found I wanted to go back and have another go at. But it's also, as well, and the finance, yes, has seeds from before too, but I'm also been interested in technology, particularly technology that seems kind of out of historical sequence, like very, very early 1930s television, for example.
I love that in this novel, early television, and I love particularly when they say, we enjoy doing this, nobody's watching, and that gives us the freedom to do what we like. I love that. That's a little bit like this podcast.
Yes, slightly, but you need to watch out, because once you become a gigantic global industry, you'll be far less free.
It's different. But you also capture, the technical geniuses of the time being quite similar to the technological, digital geniuses of today.
There is a way in which those kind of phases in any technology kind of line up with and kind of overlap with each other and are similar to each other, and the same kinds of people get involved. Iris's love interest, Jeff, is basically a nerd. He's a 1939 to 40 kind of hot nerd. And I hope he's very recognizable, even though the thing he's thrilled about is vacuum tubes and cathode ray tubes rather than motherboards and circuits. So I also, there's something, again, quasi-magical or adjacent to the magical about this very early technology when nobody knows what the rules are yet, where they've invented the chat show inadvertently, but they've also invented kind of hour-long puppet plays for adults and lots of ballet being done in a very, very confined space, so the dancers are much, much closer together. Or, which is the program that comes up and plays a part, this fabulous thing called News Map, in which a Fleet Street cartoonist would draw a map of whatever was in the news that week while the camera followed him and he explained, kind of, this is where Manchuria is to be found, north of China. I'll just put in some mountains. And I like the combination of strangeness and familiarity there.
You know what I love about your writing? You are probably the most playful author I've ever encountered, because you just play. You go from one theme to the next, whatever takes your fancy, and then you play with it the way you want to. You explore it to the max. And I was wondering, 'cause you started off by explaining yourself as a nonfiction author who's transmogrified into a novelist. Well, you kind of slightly putting yourself down there as a novelist. That's not, you're not a mongrel.
I'd be proud to be a...
Yeah, but I am curious about what happened to your writer's brain when you moved from writing nonfiction to writing fiction, or combining the two as you did and in Red Plenty.
Well, the first true thing about it is that I was always a very narrative nonfiction writer. So some aspects of my writing changed less than you'd think. But other bits did change a lot. I was frightened of dialogue. I was frightened of the discipline of observing viewpoint. In a way, I was partly drawn towards fiction writing because it seemed more honest than the games I was having to play with viewpoint to create the effects I wanted in nonfiction. Whereas, with novels, you just go, these are imaginary people, and that's how the world looks like through her eyes. I think the reason I'm flattered when people take Red Plenty, my book about Soviet economists, as an avant-garde experiment in the construction of the novel. And I suppose it sort of is, but it was also a pragmatic way for me to make a kind of transition from one kind of writing to another, and for me to try out thinking in scenes, writing dialogue, mixing in imaginary people among the real appearances by Khrushchev and others, yet still with this kind of core structure of explanation in it. It was quite difficult to get people to accept that Red Plenty was a kind of viable thing because of it being this composite of fiction and non-fiction. And it's possible to read it rather than as a bold and daring experiment, as a kind of kludge in which the narrative keeps being arrested by the need to explain, and the need to explain keeps being interrupted by my desire to write conversations and describe landscapes. but what it did do was fit the bill of my specific intentions for that book, which was to write a book not about ideas, but about the effect of ideas as they kind of drag chaotically through lives. So I needed the presence of the kind of the explanatory strand, and I needed real people whose presence felt real, so that you could feel the consequences of the ideas. And then coming out of the other end, there was another kind of lurch of uncertainty when I started writing Golden Hell. My first completely invented story. It had research about 1740s New York feeding into it. I'm still the person whose imagination needs the grit of the factual, but there came a point about 30 pages in where I thought I must just check this, and then realized there was nothing to check it against, because I was propping a ladder on the empty air and telling a story which had no warrant for its authenticity except my own decisions about what was authentic. I find it easier to talk about the technical and thingy aspects of fiction than I do to talk about its human content. In a way, writing playful and idea-rich novels is a way for me to have a busy foreground, while in the background I get on with representing the human things that interest me.
Tell me about your C.S. Lewis fan fiction that you've written.
Oh, I have to be quite careful about this because there were legal threats involved.
I see, but just the process.
After I'd written Golden Hill, I had the idea for what was going to be Light Perpetual, and the kind of this London novel over many decades about ordinary lives that turned out not to be ordinary once you looked at them close enough. But that took a while to come, and I was excited, maybe overexcited by what it turned out I'd been able to do in Golden Hill. And inside me, lobbying, I had my 10-year-old self saying, you know what, if you can do this story thing now, you know what would be really cool? It would be to satisfy my 10-year-old desperate desire for there to be one more book of the Chronicles of Narnia, because I was an obsessively C.S. Lewis loving child. They were essence of book to me as a child. He's still an enormous influence on the way my imagination works. So I set out cautiously to see if I could write another one for my own satisfaction, and
just for fun.
No, not entirely just for fun, because I'm as self-interested as the next person. And I thought, if it were, because I didn't want to write a revisionist take or an updating or a something which subjected him to a critique for his racism, or something that disagreed with him theologically, or any of that stuff. I wanted to do a piece of weird clairvoyance in which the voice of C.S. Lewis, kind of produced by me, would utter one more book by him that read as if it were by him. And it turned out to be this kind of fascinating but agonizingly difficult piece of contortionism, trying to get inside his voice and stay there. I would be constantly going, that's a nice sentence, and then crossing it out, because actually it was a sentence that I liked and he would never have uttered. Fortunately, the Narnia books are not very long, so mine only had to be sort of 45,000 words or so. And I finished it, and I had hopes that I might, since it was a very loving recreation and the people who did read it liked it, and I thought I'd managed a little bit of the kind of the uncanny aim of making it sound as if I'd channeled C.S. Lewis, but it turned out not to work on legal grounds. So there's not much else I can say
But you
about
did
it.
share it with friends. You gave it some people to read, and
I-
that brings me to my next question, actually, Francis Bufford, and that is that you very generously thank in both of these novels family, friends, or friends, colleagues for reading your work in progress.
Yes.
Chapter by chapter, pretty much.
In the case of my unfortunate wife, often page by page.
Page by page.
Yeah.
And what does that give you? Why do you do that?
Well, multiple things. The least charged of which is a sense of being less solitary and more part of a kind of community of writers in a state of mutual exchange, because I read other people's stuff, and some of the people I'm thanking are kind enough and trusting enough to send me their things in progress as well. So some of that, but also because I'm not the kind of writer who pictures a reader. So there is something very reassuring about getting confirmation when the thing is in progress that it is actually a communicative act that I'm engaging in, that this thing I'm imagining does travel. So so I like being told that it's working or not working.
Or not working. And I was just wondering, because Iris is a very, very female character in every way, including how she lives her sex life. Was that something you wanted to have read by women and confirmed as yes or no?
I'm nodding
yes,
aggressively.
Nodding.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that when you are stepping beyond the bounds of your own direct experience of the world, it's very useful to have somebody whose experience it does fall within, pointing out where you've got it right and where you've got it wrong. I am a great believer in the freedom of fiction and the power of fiction to go beyond the writer's own experience. It seems to me that we'd be cheating ourselves of the kind of essential freedom that fiction brings if we didn't let ourselves do that. But when you are doing it, the possibility of falling flat on your face increases rapidly as well. And it's good to have your imagination confirmed by somebody else's actual knowledge. But Nonesuch is a novel with a sequel which I'm writing at the moment. So I'm having the pleasure of going on being Iris for much longer than I usually get to stick with my characters, and I'm going to miss her a lot when I am no longer seeing the world through her eyes. And I like writing interesting female characters. I like. It seems to me to be self-evident that female characters should get to be difficult and unlikable when they want to be, as much as male characters.
I love the fact that the only interesting or relevant virgin in your book is a male one.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my next question, which
what
is
exactly you're about to ask me.
Which is, you mentioned you developed your writing from writing nonfiction purely to fiction, but you also went from being an atheist to being a believer, Christian. You've written a book about that, a very provocative, brilliant book called Unapologetic. It's also very funny. Very amusing, very, fun. It's a fun way of looking at it. And what I was wondering about was whether that belief accompanies you when you write about supernatural things and about life and death?
Yes, is the short answer. Because
how did I get to this from Jeff being a virgin?
I'm not sure. Possibly via Bethlehem and ladies in blue cloaks. But if you are a believer, then even when you aren't explicitly setting out to write stories that touch consciously and deliberately on faith, it's part of your fundamental understanding of the world and of how human beings work. It is inevitably the ink in which you're dipping your pen. That's a deeply dated metaphor, and I need a keyboard version of it, but I can't think of one. It influences your sense of how humans work, and consequently of the stories you might tell about them. Nonesuch is deliberately a kind of counterpart to the, quotes, spiritual thrillers that Lewis's friend Charles Williams was writing during the war, except without the bullying and the creepiness where women are concerned, I hope. But no, my answer here has to be complicated, because it borrows, Nonesuch, a kind of Christian cosmology of an old-fashioned kind, with angels and archangels and spirits of the air in it. And the fascist occultists have, boo, hiss, chanced on kind of one magical thing that works in this world. And as a maker, I enjoy playing with this stuff, play being very serious. I like suddenly being in conversation with kind of Milton and Paradise Lost. I'm not interested in doing angels who are kind of hunky bikers with feathers. I think the weirdness of angels is essential to how you'd use them in a story. But I sort of am and am not taking it literally. I'm creating a fantastic piece of structure for a story which is adjacent to the stuff I really feel and really believe, but is not a straightforward one-to-one mapping of it into the story. I do not, in fact, believe that the air over London in 1940 was full of angels as it was of bombers. On the other hand, I think that if you tell a story with angels in it, it gives you openable doors into things I think are really real. But you have to be able to play. You have to treat all of this, and especially the stuff you believe in most seriously, as open to play and with kind of rules up for grabs about how you do it. I do not wish to write pious fiction. I wish to write fiction which has inevitable taproots down into what I really feel and what I really believe. But I don't want anyone to think that they're receiving a photograph of what I think the world is literally like. Just one soaked through in some more indirect way with it.
Finally, this is a question we ask all our authors at the end of a podcast. In a way, you've answered it in many different ways, but let me ask it again. Why do you write?
I think I have a fundamentally story-shaped understanding of the world. It's how I handle complexity. It's what I want to do with my sense that human life is kind of inherently tragicomic, that it produces kind of laughter and tears indissolubly mixed. It's also the only thing I'm good at.
Francis Bufford, thank you very much for joining us on Shop Talk with Writers.
Thank you.
This was Shop Talk with Writers. Our guest today was Francis Bufford. His new novel, Nonesuch, is published by Faber. I'm Elena Lappin. Thank you for listening.